The House will be in order. A prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Coughlin.
Eternal and gracious Lord, nothing escapes your attention. You read the intentions of our minds and the true desires of our hearts. May everything we do begin with your holy inspiration, continue with your sustaining grace, and reach your divine purpose for the good of your people, not just some people, but for the good of the entire nation. So both in word and deed, may we give you glory, now and forever.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Everyone, including our guests in the gallery, please join in. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain a one-minute request. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Request permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, Juarez, Mexico is one of the most dangerous cities in the world, experiencing a fierce turf war between drug cartels. More than 3,000 people were murdered there in 2010 alone. 3 triple homicides occurred just this past weekend. Also, 2 American teenagers, Carlos Bermudez and Juan Echeverri, were brutally murdered in the weekend shootings. Juarez, across from El Paso, Texas, as well as the rest of the border, is a lawless war zone controlled by the violent drug cartels. Despite the continued loss of American life, the United States government refuses to admit that there's a war on the southern border. This violence is a lethal cancer and is spreading quickly into the United States. The narco-terrorists do not recognize international lines. This is a matter of national security and is the responsibility of the federal government to protect the border. Meanwhile, the administration has proposed a whopping $53 billion in high-speed rail subsidies. Instead of more choo-choo trains, that money should go to the National Border Security Defense. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for unanimous consent to address this House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple days ago during the Super Bowl, a TV ad was aired that highlighted the grit and spirit and ingenuity of Metro Detroiters, which gives us the ability to make some of the greatest cars in the world. Well, that spirit of Detroit is rooted in our American values of life, of liberty, of the pursuit of happiness. And it's that spirit that transformed Detroit in World War II into the arsenal of democracy that saved this country, saved this world from the threat of fascism. And, Mr. Speaker, I believe today that that same spirit of Detroit will help build the new cars that will be powered by electricity, to help build new homes and offices which will be heated by the sun, and manufacture the best products in the world. You see, when you make it in Detroit, you help make it in America. I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask permission to address the House for 1 minute, advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, as Americans recognize Black History Month, I am honored this month in the Midlands of South Carolina that history is being made by Reverend Dr. Charles B. Jackson, Sr. Dr. Jackson is being hailed on February 27th for serving his historic and extraordinary 40 years of dynamic leadership at Brooklyn Baptist Church in West Columbia. He began preaching at age 9 and at age 18 was installed as pastor, energizing one of the fastest growing congregations in the Southeast. With great humility, he's encouraged the church's 65 ministries. Dr. Jackson promoted a new sanctuary that seats 2,300, followed by a 68,000 square foot community resource center In 2008, Brooklyn acquired a 94,000 square foot educational facility with 11 acres downtown while employing over 160 dedicated personnel. A second location was launched in Richland Northeast, pastored by Dr. Christopher Levy Johnson. Dr. Jackson is married to the former Robin Hafer and the father of 2 children. Reverend Charles B. Jackson, Jr., pastor of New Laurel Street Baptist Church, and Candace Jackson, an associate attorney with Nelson Mullins Riley in Scarborough, along with daughter-in-law, former Iva Gaiman, and 4 grandchildren, Kayla, Charles III, Caleb, and Carter. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise?
Mr. Speaker, I request permission to address the House regarding extent.
Without objection.
This afternoon, the House will debate extension of the Patriot Act. I have here a report from the LATimes.com that says that FBI intelligence investigations have compromised the civil liberties of American citizens far more frequently and to a greater extent than was previously assumed. The report goes on to say that in 2007, the Justice Department's Inspector General told Congress the FBI may have violated the law or government policy as many as 3,000 times since 2003 in the course of secretly collecting telephone, bank, and credit card records without warrants, instead using so-called national security letters that give them the ability to demand this kind of information and get it. The Patriot Act is a destructive undermining of the Constitution. We started this Congress off with a discussion about we're reading the Constitution. Many of us carry constitutions with us in our pocket. How about today we take a stand for the Constitution to say that all Americans should be free from unreasonable search and seizure and to make certain that the Patriot Act, the attempt to reauthorize the Patriot Act is beat down. It's time that we really remember the essence of what that motto, "Don't tread on me," means.
Expired.
It means you protect your liberties. You stand for freedom.
What purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to rise, address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, on November 5th, 1994, former President Ronald Reagan announced that he'd been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. "I now begin the journey that will lead me into the sunset of my life," he wrote in a letter. At that time, 4 million Americans suffered with Alzheimer's. Today, over 5 million now carry that diagnosis, and for members of my generation, that number will double to 10 million. Now, President Reagan's 100th birthday would have been this past Sunday. This week, I am introducing the MIND Act. If passed, it will establish the issuance of United States Alzheimer's bonds to aid in the funding of Alzheimer's research. Proceeds of bond sales would fund the program and be available to the Director of the National Institutes of Health solely for Alzheimer's research. The revenues generated by the sale of bonds would be funds for research in addition, not instead of, regular appropriated funds. In his letter, President Reagan said, "I know for America there will always be a bright dawn ahead." I know he is correct. There could be no more loving gift for members of my generation to future generations than to provide additional non-federal funding to help people who are afflicted or will be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair will remind all persons in the gallery that they're here as guests of the House, that any manifestations of approval or disapproval of the proceedings of this House is in violation of the rules of the House. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it comes as a surprise to most Americans to learn that the largest abortion provider in America is also the largest recipient of federal funding under Title X. And it's heartbreaking news this morning that Planned Parenthood of America has now been the subject of one more undercover video showing someone posing as a pimp being facilitated by employees at Planned Parenthood in how to secure secret abortions, STD testing, and contraception for child prostitutes. You know, as a father of 2 teenage daughters, I see the video that came out this morning. I see the video that came out last week, and it's an outrage to me that employees of Planned Parenthood clinics across the country are facilitating the abuse of minor girls in this country. It should be a scandal to every American. The time has come to deny all federal funding to Planned Parenthood of America.
I've authored the Title X Abortion Provider Prohibition Act, which would deny Title X funds to Planned Parenthood or any other abortion provider, and Congress must act, and act now, to move this important legislation. Pro-life Americans and all Americans should not be forced to subsidize America's largest abortion provider or to continue to provide federal taxpayer dollars to Title X clinics that engage in this abhorrent behavior.
What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise? Without objection.
In the wake of the devastating attacks targeting Christians in Iraq and Egypt last year, it is clear that religious minorities in the Middle East are facing a grave threat. There are even reports of Christian women who, having fled Iraq, are living in ghettos in Syria and having been driven to prostitution in a desperate attempt to provide for their families. With the exception of Israel, the Bible contains more reference to ancient Iraq than any other country. Abraham, Nineveh, Esther, Daniel, to name a few. Iraq and Egypt are not an anomaly. A Christian mother of 5 in Pakistan remains in prison, charged with blasphemy. If found guilty, she faces a death penalty. In the face of these grim realities, I have introduced bipartisan legislation, H.R. 440, which would create a special envoy at the State Department to advocate on behalf of religious minorities in the Middle East and South Central Asia. I urge all colleagues who care about the persecution of Christians in Iraq, in Pakistan, in Egypt, to co-sponsor my bill and yield back the balance of my time.
Purpose the gentleman from Florida rise. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, this past weekend, America came together to honor the 100th birthday of President Ronald Reagan. President Reagan believed that personal accountability and hard work are the cornerstones of the American dream. He understood America's greatness and his exceptionalism. No American will ever forget how he touted America as a shining city on a hill and, quote, built on rocks stronger than oceans, wind-swept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds, living in harmony and peace. In these troubled economic times, we would be wise to follow Reagan's lessons that limited government, low taxes, and free enterprise foster economic growth and job creation. Reagan knew that freedom was America's greatest export to the world, whether it was promoting freedom overseas against a communist threat or at home through free markets. President Reagan left an unparalleled legacy to his country, and we honor his extraordinary life on what would have been his 100th birthday.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin rise?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, a few minutes ago, the distinguished gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich, called for not reauthorizing temporarily 3 expiring provisions of the Patriot Act, allegedly because the FBI had found civil liberties violations. In his 1 minute address, the gentleman from Ohio unfortunately missed the point. He used the law on national security letters to show abuses of the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act did not authorize national security letters. Those letters were authorized in 1986 under legislation sponsored by the senator from Vermont, Mr. Leahy, who opposes the Patriot Act and always has. But it was his national security letter authorization that the abuses were contained. I would hope as we debate the temporary reauthorization of 3 expiring provisions of the Patriot Act that we not paint that act with a broad brush.
Gentleman's
but
time
if
has expired.
There are specific abuses of these 3 expiring provisions, we should confine the debate to them. I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, I have the honor to transmit a sealed envelope received from the White House on January 26, 2011 at 3:55 p.m. and said to contain a message from the President whereby he submits a copy of a notice filed earlier with the Federal Register continuing the national emergency with respect to Côte d'Ivoire, first declared in Executive Order 13396 of February 7, 2006. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas, Clerk of the House.
The clerk will read the message.
To the Congress of the United States, Sections 202D of the National Emergency Act, 50 U.S.C. 1622D, provides for the automatic termination of a national emergency unless prior to the anniversary date of its declaration, the President publishes in the Federal Register and transmits to the Congress a notice stating that the emergency is to continue in effect beyond the anniversary date. In accordance with this provision, I have sent to the Federal Register for publication the enclosed notice stating that the national emergency declared in Executive Order 13396 of February 7, 2006, with respect to the situation or in relation to the Côte d'Ivoire, is to continue in effect beyond February 7, 2011. The situation in or in relation to Côte d'Ivoire, which has been addressed by the United Nations Security Council in Resolution 1572 of November 15, 2004, and subsequent resolutions, has resulted in the massacre of large numbers of civilians, widespread human rights abuses, significant political violence and unrest, and fatal attacks against international peacekeeping forces. In March 2007, the Ouagadougou political agreement was signed by two primary protagonists in Côte d'Ivoire's conflict. As demonstrated by recent events surrounding the presidential election in Côte d'Ivoire, the situation in or in relation to Côte d'Ivoire continues to pose an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. For these reasons, I have determined that it is necessary to continue the national emergency and related measures blocking the property of certain persons contributing to the conflict in Côte d'Ivoire. Signed, Barack Obama, the White House, January 26, 2011.
Message is referred to the Committee on Foreign Affairs and ordered printed. For what purpose the gentlewoman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today marks the one-year anniversary of the passing of our dear colleague, Congressman Jack Murtha of Pennsylvania. I rise to pay tribute to him. He was a giant of this chamber, a legislator of unsurpassed talents, a soldier of extraordinary courage, a political servant, a public servant to the end. Those of us who served with him were honored to call him colleague, or those of us in this body, many of us were privileged to call him friend, colleague and friend. The outpouring of accolades that came forward at his passing was something quite remarkable, and I hope that it was a comfort and has been a comfort to his family. Certainly to those of us who worked with him, who knew his love of his district, who remember the way he held court in the Pennsylvania corner and gave out his blessing and his advice, Jack Murtha's wisdom, counsel, and knowledge will continue to inspire us all. To watch Jack Murtha legislate was to watch a master at work. But more indicative of his character was to watch him communicate with our men and women in uniform, whether near the battlefield or near their bedside. He thanked them for their courage and listened to their concerns. He always answered their needs, responded to their calls for body armor, up-armored vehicles, and reliable radios, among other things. In those moments, he bonded with them on with his own personal military experiences. He was awarded the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart himself. The nation saw Jack's courage on the battlefield, in Congress, as he spoke out against the war in Iraq, and in doing so, he made the distinction between the war and the warrior. Always committed to our national defense, forever bound to the cause of our national security, Jack Murtha measured the strength of our country not only by the might of our military, he also measured it by the strength and well-being of our people. A much decorated champion on the battlefield, he was a hero in advancing scientific research to fight against breast cancer, prostate cancer, diabetes, HIV, and AIDS, to name a few. Today, we remember him, always thinking of the motto of the Marine Corps, Semper Fi. That motto, of the Marine Corps, which Jack served proudly for 37 years, was the motto of his life. To the end, he remained always faithful to God and country, to his hometown of Johnstown, and most of all to his wife Joyce, his children, and his grandchildren. Patriot, champion, hero, giant, Jack Murtha. We will never see his like again. Again, I hope it is a comfort to his family that this 1 year later, so many of us remember Jack Murtha and pray for his family. With that, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on January 26, 2011 at 4:50 p.m. that the Senate passed without amendment H.R. 366, Appointment, Ronald Reagan Centennial Commission. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on January 27, 2011 at 4:03 p.m. Appointment, Congressional Budget Office. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on February 1, 2011 at 10:52 a.m. Appointments, Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institution. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on February 2, 2011 at 12:00 p.m. that the Senate passed Senate 188, Appointments, Migratory Bird Conservation Commission, President's Export Council. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on February 3, 2011 at 10:33 a.m. Appointments, Senate National Security Working Group, Board of Trustees of Gallaudet University, United States Holocaust Memorial Council, Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, United States-China Interparliamentary Group Conference, United States-Japan Interparliamentary Group Conference, Mexico-United States Interparliamentary Group Conference, United States-Russia Interparliamentary Group Conference, British-American Interparliamentary Group Conference. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
The Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on February 4, 2011 at 11:52 a.m. Appointment, Senate National Security Working Group. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
Pursuant to Clause 4 of Rule 1, the following enrolled bill was signed by the Speaker on Thursday, January 27, 2011.
H.R. 366, to provide for an additional temporary extension of programs under the Small Business Act and the Small Business Investment Act of 1958 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote The yeas or nays are ordered, and on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Record votes on postponed questions will be taken after 6:30 p.m. today. What purpose the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 514.
Clerk, report the title of the bill.
H.R. 514, a bill to extend expiring provisions of the USA Patriot Improvement and Reauthorization Act of 2005 and Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004 relating to access to business records involving individual terrorists and agents of foreign powers and roving wiretaps until December 8, 2011.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members will have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 514 currently under consideration.
Without objection. Gentleman will proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, next September 11th will mark the 10-year anniversary of the worst terrorist attack on the U.S. in history. America is fortunate not to have suffered another attack of such magnitude in the past decade, but we must not take this relatively secure country for granted or let our safety become complacency. America is safe today not because terrorists and spies have given up their goal to destroy our freedoms and our way of life. We are safe today because the men and women of our armed forces, our intelligence community, and our law enforcement agencies work every single day to protect us. And Congress must ensure that they are equipped with the resources they need to counteract continuing terrorist threats. On February 28th, 3 important provisions of the USA Patriot Act will expire. These provisions give investigators in national security cases the authority to conduct roving wiretaps, to seek certain business records, and to gather intelligence on lone terrorists who are not affiliated with a known terrorist group. These types of provisions have been used by domestic law enforcement agencies for years to apprehend typical criminals. It is common sense to give our national security investigators the same tools to fight terrorists that our police officers have to combat crime. The ongoing threat from al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups continues. In the last few years, terrorists have attempted to blow up a plane over Detroit, to bomb New York's subway system, to destroy skyscrapers in Dallas, Texas, and Springfield, Illinois, and to detonate a car bomb in New York City's Times Square. Most of these plots were thwarted thanks to the Patriot Act and other national security laws. The Patriot Act works. It has proved effective in preventing terrorist attacks and protecting Americans. To let these provisions expire would leave every American less safe. We must continue these intelligence gathering measures to win our fight against terrorists. And President Obama agrees. In a letter to Congress last month, Director of National Intelligence Admiral Clapper and Attorney General Holder urged us to reauthorize the expiring provisions, noting that they are critical tools that, quote, have been used in numerous highly sensitive intelligence collection operations, end quote. This bill reauthorizes the expiring provisions through December 8th of 2011, the last day that the House of Representatives is scheduled to be in session. This extension serves 2 important functions. First, it ensures that these intelligence gathering tools will remain available to national security investigators. And second, it provides Congress with the opportunity to engage in a thorough review of these provisions as we pursue and consider a longer reauthorization. I urge my colleagues to support our ability to continue to protect Americans against terrorist plots and attacks. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Connors.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
And I reluctantly rise in non-support of this provision to extend expiring provisions of the Patriot Act because of Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which I'd like to call to your attention. This is the act that allows a secret FISA court to authorize our government to collect business records or anything else that a person or business to produce virtually any type record. We don't think that that was right then. We don't think it's right now. And I feel obligated to oppose any extension of these expiring acts since we've had no hearings, no markup, no committee vote. Nobody's done anything about it. They're saying, well, ex-chairman, just support this and we'll get to it afterward. Well, I can't go along with that. This provision is contrary to traditional notions of search and seizure, which require the government to show reasonable suspicion or probable cause before undertaking an investigation that infringes upon a person's privacy. And so I urge a no vote on the extension of these expiring provisions and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner, who is currently the chairman of the Crime and Homeland Security Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee, and who previously, as chairman of the Judiciary Committee itself, was responsible for writing the Patriot Act provisions. Yield to the gentleman from Wisconsin.
Gentleman from Wisconsin.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. At the outset, let me say I'm a little bit puzzled that my friend from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, is opposing the extension of these 3 provisions of the Patriot Act today, because last year he called up a Senate bill that provided for a year's extension of these 3 provisions and managed the time and voted for it. And after hearing his comments, I'm wondering why he has changed his mind.
Would the gentleman yield?
On your time, if you can yield me an additional minute, I'll be happy to yield.
Gentleman from Wisconsin will proceed.
Okay. I thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding. In 19 days, 3 national security laws will expire unless Congress votes to reauthorize them. H.R. 514 temporarily extends these laws. FISA business records, roving wiretaps, and the lone wolf definition until December 8th of this year. As chairman of the House Judiciary Committee in the last decade, I oversaw the enactment of the USA Patriot Act in response to 9/11 terrorist attacks. Title II of the Act addressed enhanced foreign intelligence and law enforcement surveillance authority. 16 sections of that title were originally set to expire on December 31st, 2005. Also set to expire on that date was Section 6001 of the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004, which is the lone wolf definition. In 2005, I again spearheaded the effort to reauthorize the Patriot Act. Recognizing the significance of the Act to America's counterterrorism operations and the need for thorough oversight, the House Judiciary Committee held 9 subcommittee hearings, 3 days of full committee hearings, and a robust full committee markup reauthorizing legislation. The USA Patriot Improvement and Reauthorization Act of 2005 made permanent 14 of the 16 intelligence provisions. The Act extended the sunset on Section 206 FISA roving wiretaps, Section 215 FISA business records, and the lone wolf definition until the end of 2009. But the 3 remaining temporary provisions were not reauthorized before that deadline. Instead, the Democratic majority chose twice to extend the provisions, first for 2 months and then for a year, without ever bringing a reauthorization bill to the floor. This Congress, things will be different. We must approve a temporary extension today to keep these critical national security tools in place. But this extension will afford Congress sufficient time to hold hearings and markups, then adopt a permanent reauthorization of these provisions this year, which I intend to introduce soon. The time for multiple temporary extensions is over. The terrorist threat has not subsided and will not expire, and neither should our national security laws. It is equally important that Congress make permanent the lone wolf definition. This provision closes a gap in the FISA Act, which, allowed to expire, could permit an individual terrorist to slip through the cracks and carry out his plot undetected. When FISA was originally enacted in 1978, terrorists were believed to be members of an identified group. That's not the case today. Today, more than ever, we are confronted with threats from loosely organized terrorist groups or individuals who may subscribe to a movement or certain beliefs but do not belong to or identify themselves with a specific terrorist group. Without the lone wolf definition, our surveillance tools will be powerless to act against this growing act to America's security. Section 206 of the Patriot Act authorizes the use of roving or multi-point wiretaps for national security and intelligence investigations. This allows the government to use a single wiretap order to cover any communications device that the target uses or may use. Without roving wiretap authority, investigators would be forced to seek a new court order each time they need to change the location, phone, or computer that needs to be monitored. Section 215 of the Act allows the FISA court to issue orders granting the government access to business records in foreign intelligence, international terrorism, and clandestine intelligence cases. The 2005 Act expanded the safeguards against potential abuse of Section 215 authority, including additional congressional oversight, procedural protections, application requirements, and judicial review. Each of these provisions are integral to defending America's national security and must be kept intact. I urge my colleagues to join me in passing H.R. 514 and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased now to recognize the gentleman from New York, Gerald Nadler, who has been the chairman of the Constitution Subcommittee longer than any member in the Congress. 3 minutes.
Gentleman from New York.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this extension of the expiring provisions of the Patriot Act and of the Intelligence Reform of Terrorism Prevention Act. I cannot support this extension when the House has done nothing to consider these provisions or possible reforms or even to hold a hearing or a markup. While in the past members have had the opportunity to receive classified briefings, we have dozens of new members who have received no such briefings. Section 215 authorizes the government to obtain any tangible thing relevant to a terrorism investigation, even if there is no showing that the thing pertains to suspected terrorists or terrorist activities. It is sweeping in its scope, and the government is not required to show reasonable suspicion or probable cause before undertaking an investigation that infringes upon a person's privacy, including the records of what he's read in the library. Congress should either ensure that things collected with this power have a meaningful nexus to suspected terrorist activity or allow the provision to expire. Section 206 provides for roving wiretaps, which permit the government to obtain intelligence surveillance orders that identify neither the person nor the facility to be tapped. This is supposedly to update the law to deal with portable cell phones and the like and other modern technology. But it goes too far. Without the necessity to specify either the person or the facility to be tapped, this is for all practical purposes a general grant of authority to wiretap anyone and anywhere the government wants. There are almost no limits to this authority, and the requirement that the government name no requirement that the government name a specific target. This is very akin to the old British general writs of assistance, which engendered the first colonial outrage that led to the American Revolution. Section 6001 of the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004, the so-called lone wolf provision, permits secret intelligence surveillance of non-U.S. persons who are not affiliated, who are conceitedly not affiliated with a foreign government or organization. According to government testimony, this provision has never been used, yet it remains on the books. It's never been used because there's ample other authority to do that in any event. Surveillance of an individual is not working with a foreign government or organization is not what we normally understand as foreign intelligence. There may be many good reasons for government to keep tabs on such people, but that is no reason to suspend all our laws under the pretext that this is a foreign intelligence operation. While some have argued that each of these authorities remain necessary tools in the fight against terrorism and that they must be extended without any modifications, others have counseled careful review and modification. Some have even urged that we allow some or all of these authorities to sunset. I believe we should not miss the opportunity to review the Act in its entirety, to examine how it's working, where it has been successful, where it's failed, where it goes too far, where it may need improvement. That is the purpose of sunsets, and to extend it without that review undermines that purpose. I've also introduced the National Security Letters Reform Act, which would make vital improvements to the current law in order to better protect civil liberties while ensuring that NSLs remain a useful tool in national security investigations. I hope we can work to strike that balance in a responsible and effective manner, but the record of the abuse of the NSL authority is too great for Congress to ignore. I realize the majority has the votes to extend these provisions. I hope we'll be able, after this vote, to examine carefully the way these provisions have been used or abused and to look at ways to reform the law in light of experience. That was the purpose of sunsets, and I hope we can take advantage of that opportunity. I thank the gentleman for yielding. Now I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, how much time remains on each side?
The gentleman from Texas has 12 minutes. The gentleman from Michigan has 15 minutes.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased at this time to recognize the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Ron Paul, for 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Texas.
I thank the gentleman. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this bill. I was opposed to the Patriot Act in 2001 and do not believe now that it's a good idea to extend it. You know, the Fourth Amendment is rather clear. It says that we should be secure in our papers, our persons, our homes, and our effects, and that if warrants are to be issued, we have to do it with probable cause and describe in particular the places, the people, and the things that we're going to look at. And I think what has happened, though, over the years has been that we have diluted the Fourth Amendment. It was greatly diluted in 2001, but it started a lot earlier than that. When the FISA law was originally written in 1978, that really introduced the notion that the Fourth Amendment was relative and not absolute. And later on, it was further weakened in 98 and then, of course, in 2001. I think our reaction to the horrors of 9/11, we can understand the concern and the fear that was developed, but I think the reaction took us in the wrong direction, because the assumption was made, of course, that we weren't spending enough money on surveillance, and even though then our intelligence agencies received $40 billion, they didn't give us the right information. So now we're spending $80 billion. But it also looks like the conclusion was that the American people had too much privacy. And if we undermine the American people's privacy, somehow or another, we're going to be safer. I think another thing that has come up lately has been that the purpose of government is to make us perfectly safe. Now, it is good to be safe, but governments can't make us safe. I question whether or not we have been made safer by the Patriot Act, but let's say a law makes us somewhat safer. Is that a justification for the government to do anything they want? For instance, if you want to be perfectly safe from child abuse and wife beating, the government could put a camera in every one of our houses and our bedrooms, and maybe there would be somebody made safer this way, but what would you be giving up? So perfect safety is not the purpose of government. What we want from government is to enforce the law and to protect our liberties. This, to me, has been, especially since 9/11, a classical example of sacrificing liberty for safety and security. Now, I didn't invent those terms. They've been around a long time, and it's easily justified, and I can understand it, because I was here in 2001 when this came up, and people become frightened. The American people want something done, but I think this is misdirected and not, it doesn't serve our benefits. So I think at this time we should really question why we're extending this. We're extending the three worst parts.
Why were these sunsetted? Because people had concern about them. They weren't sure they were good pieces, and maybe they were overkill, and therefore they were saying, we better reassess it. So what have we done? We have already extended it twice, and here we're going to do it again with the intent, I think, in a year to reassess this. But this bill doesn't make things worse. It doesn't make anything better. But it does extend what I consider and others consider bad legislation. I ask for a no vote on this legislation.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Dent.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to speak on this very important issue, the reauthorization of the Patriot Act. For a variety of reasons, we need to reauthorize this bill. First and foremost, there are three provisions I think we're all very familiar with. It's the lone wolf provision. It's the roving wiretaps, of course, which is something else that we very much need to do, and also the business records provision. With respect to roving wiretaps, I believe it's already been stated on this floor, but it should be stated once again. Law enforcement has been using roving wiretaps for years against drug dealers and organized crime, I believe since 1986. Extending that roving wiretap provision to terrorists, makes good sense. We've been doing it. We need to give law enforcement and our intelligence services the tools they need to take down these terror plots before they become operational. That's why this extension is needed. The lone wolf provision, too, it should be noted, is also important. Many of the types of plots we are trying to foil now are being carried out by lone wolves. Major Hassan is a good example. Jihad Jain and others are lone wolves, and we need this capacity so that we can pursue these lone wolves just as we would individuals or terrorists who are part of a terrorist organization or an agent of a foreign power. So that is absolutely essential. And with respect to the issue of the business records, often people would say that we are somehow trying to examine one's library records, what books they're reading. That's really not the case. We know that 9/11 terrorists were using public library computers. We knew that they were also using university library computers to make plane reservations as well as to confirm those reservations. So the idea is to be able to access one's business records. That's what we're after, to make sure that we can not only apprehend or go after that individual who is planning an attack, but also that cell or that network of individuals with whom that individual may be working. That's why we need this issue of business records contained in this reauthorization. In fact, I'm not even certain that the word library appears anywhere in the Patriot Act, but nevertheless, this has been dubbed the library provision, which it really is not. So for all these reasons, I think it's critically important that we continue to provide our law enforcement with the tools they need, our intelligence services with the tools they need to stop terrorism. We cannot tie their hands. We cannot tie the hands of local law enforcement. We are asking them to do more and more. The critics of many of these this legislation often say we need to give local law enforcement, let law enforcement fight these battles. Well, let's give them the tools they need. This gives them the tools. I urge passage, support for this reauthorization of the Patriot Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased now to recognize the distinguished gentleman from Virginia, Bobby Scott, who has been the chair of the Subcommittee on Crime in the Judiciary Committee for 4 years. 3 minutes.
Gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to H.R. 514, which would extend for 1 year sweeping governmental intrusions into our lives and privacy that were authorized by the USA Patriot Act and the 2004 Intelligence Act. Without meaningful oversight demonstrating that these extraordinary powers are needed, we should not extend these provisions for 1 full year or for any period of time for that matter, and I therefore oppose the bill. I'm opposed not simply because I simply do not accept the argument that in order to be safe, we necessarily have to sacrifice our rights and freedoms. I agree with Benjamin Franklin, who stated during the formation of our nation that they who give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. One of the provisions the bill reauthorizes is Section 215 of the Patriot Act. It gives the government power to secretly invade our private records, such as books we read at the library, by merely alleging that they are relevant to a terrorism investigation, but without having to show that the seized material is in connection with any specific suspected terrorist or terrorist activities. There is no requirement to show probable cause or even reasonable suspicion of being related to a specific act of terrorism, and therefore there's no meaningful standard to judge whether or not the material is in fact necessary. Another provision of H.R. 514 is Section 206 of the Patriot Act, which is referred to as a roving John Doe wiretap provision. It gives the government the power to wiretap a phone conversation without having to show which phone will be used or even who will be using it, and without requiring a court order for the specific roving tap. Third provision is Section 6001 of the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004, referred to as the Lone Wolf provision. It gives the government the power to spy on individuals in the United States who are not U.S. citizens or permanent resident aliens, even though they are not agents of a foreign government or any terrorist organization. Unfortunately, this means that if those targeted have any interaction with an American citizen, then that U.S. citizen is spied upon as well. We already allow spying on such non-citizens outside of the United States, or even in the United States where there is probable cause that they are agents of a foreign government or members of a terrorist organization, but this is an extension of that power which could envelop anybody simply as a result of the occasion of interacting with a targeted person, even while we're in the United States. The third three provisions give the government power to invade our privacy, even when there is no probable cause, nor even reasonable suspicion or credible evidence of any wrongdoing, and without allowing the kind of detached oversight such as a court warrant, which is generally called upon when such power over individuals is extended. We need, could I get 30 additional seconds?
Of course.
Thank you. Absent these oversight protections, even after the fact, in the case of emergencies, all three provisions should be allowed to expire unless we demonstrate in hearings and oversight hearings that these powers are necessary and narrowly tailored to achieve a compelling national security interest. Freedoms and protections these provisions take away are the very core of our values and liberties, and so these protections should not be legislated away without rigorous oversights to protect against abuse. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, there has been some criticism today that Section 215 Business Records Authority gives national security agencies too much access to confidential records. But Section 215 has more strict requirements than grand jury subpoenas used in criminal investigations. Unlike a grand jury subpoena, which is not issued by a judge, a 215 order can only be used by a FISA court judge. Section 215 only grants terrorism investigators the power to get records held by third parties, such as a hotel or car rental records. Also, there's been criticism that Section 215 violates Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. However, a request for business records held by a third party is not a search under the Fourth Amendment. The target of an investigation does not own the records and therefore has no reasonable expectation of privacy in them. Section 215 cannot be used to acquire records of U.S. persons based solely on First Amendment protected activity. And, Mr. Speaker, I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, no one has worked more carefully on this matter than Dennis Kucinich, the distinguished gentleman from Cleveland, who I now yield 2.5 minutes to.
Gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conyers. I certainly appreciate that, and I will, certainly never seek to impugn the feelings of those who say that we have to have the Patriot Act in order to protect our country. We're all patriots here, and we all want America to be protected. But we have to remember our constitutional experience here. And the reason why we have a Fourth Amendment that protects people from not just from unreasonable search and seizure, but from unwarranted intrusion by the government into their lives. When we look at our constitutional experience and all of the efforts that made in the build-up to it, we didn't hear, give me liberty or give me a wiretap. We didn't hear, don't tread on me, but it's okay to spy. What we heard was a ringing declaration about freedom, and it was enshrined in the Constitution. I stood on the floor of the House way back when the Patriot Act came forward, voted against it because I read it, understood that it opened up the door for a broad reach, and possibilities of broad reach by the government into our daily lives. Now, the gentleman from Wisconsin, who's my friend, correctly pointed out earlier the difference between national security letters and the Patriot Act. But it also is true that Section 505 of the Patriot Act gave the government the ability to greatly expand who can issue a national security letter, so much so that nearly 50,000 national security letters were issued by the FBI, and I think the year was 2006. They don't have to use Section 215 of the Patriot Act. They can just invoke the national security letter authority and reach into people's financial records, their medical records, or their reading material. What's happening to our country? Why are we giving up our basic liberties? We need to take a stand here, and this is as good a day as any to take a stand. Many members of Congress, including those supported by my friends in the Tea Party, maintain their goal is to get rid of big government, get government out of their lives. Well, how about the Patriot Act, which has the broadest reach and the deepest reach of government into our daily lives? Shouldn't we be thinking about that? Some want to get government out of health care, some want to get government out of retirement security. How about getting government out of people's bedrooms, out of people's financial records, out of people's medical records? Vote no on extending the Patriot Act.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner, as much time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, there's been a lot said about national security letters. The authority for them was made permanent in 2006 and is not a part of this bill. So we ought to completely forget about the complaints about national security letters. What I will say is that in the 2006 reauthorization of the Patriot Act, there were provisions in to give recipients of a national security letter the right to obtain judicial review. And I'm proud of that fact because I think whatever constitutional infirmities there were in this part of the Patriot Act were solved. Now, we hear an awful lot about no oversight. The people on the other side of the aisle who are complaining about this had the authority to have oversight hearings. There was only one of them in the last Congress, and you compare that to the 9 subcommittee hearings, 3 full committee hearings, and a full markup that we had in 2006 when this side of the aisle had the majority. The people who have been doing the oversight have been the Republicans, not the Democrats. The people who know this law is making Americans safer are the Republicans, and the Democrats once again are complaining. I yield back.
The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased now to recognize Mr. Rush Holt of New Jersey for 2 minutes.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, gentlemen, the powers of intelligence and enforcement, but also the most fearsome. They must be wielded very, very carefully. For decades, our government routinely collected information on potential and has collected on potential foreign threats through various forms of surveillance. These collection activities enjoy broad bipartisan support in our country because of their value in helping to protect American citizens and interests. However, in the 1960s and 1970s, these collection capabilities were turned on the American people, and executive branch agencies engaged in spying on the American public, sometimes even for political purposes. The ensuing public backlash triggered the adoption of legal reforms that gave us laws to help prevent a repeat of these abuses. Subsequently, the tragedy of September 11, 2001 gave proponents of extended domestic surveillance a powerful political and rhetorical weapon which they used to reduce constitutional protections against surveillance and seizures without appropriate warrants. When the Congress passed the Patriot Act in March of 2006, it included sunset requirements of 3 provisions that you've heard about today. Since 2005, I've voted against extending these and other provisions because these provisions are overly broad and frequently abused, while still not improving truly the security of the American people. My concerns are supported by the revelations of abuses of those authorities during hearings of the House Judiciary Committee in 2009 and in multiple reports issued by the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. The bill before us today does nothing to fix these problems or prevent future abuses. This bill does not raise the standards for intelligence collection to ensure that the right people are targeted in the first place. The law was not meant to sunset so that we could periodically reauthorize it unchanged. We're now on the verge of the 3rd temporary extension with no remedies for the flaws identified by this body and the Department of Justice Inspector General. For all of these reasons,
time has expired.
I urge members